She arrived on a September afternoon when the sun painted the California mountains golden, and no one in the town of Redwood Creek could imagine that this elegant woman in a navy blue dress and velvet hat carried with her a secret capable of destroying lives and rewriting destinies. Isabella stepped down from the stagecoach with the grace of a high society lady, but there was something in her green eyes that whispered dark stories, secrets buried so deeply that even she dared not unearth them. The coachman who had brought her from Sacramento seemed nervous, his eyes constantly checking the surroundings as if expecting trouble. He unloaded Isabella's luggage with unusual haste, refused the tip she offered, and departed before even the dust from her arrival had settled. The residents who witnessed the scene exchanged curious glances, but no one dared ask questions. In frontier towns, one learned early that some questions were too dangerous to ask. Ethan watched from the saloon porch, his fingers drumming on the handle of the Colt 45 that never left his hip. At 32, he was known in 3 states as the most relentless bounty hunter in the West, a man who had transformed violence into art and death into profession. His hands bore the blood of 17 men, all killed in fair duels, all deserving of the fate they met. But when Isabella raised her eyes and met his through the dust of the main street, something inside Ethan's chest broke and mended itself at the same time. There was something in the way she moved that awakened all of Ethan's hunter instincts. She walked with the confidence of someone accustomed to danger, but also with the caution of one who knew she was being watched. Her eyes discreetly swept every window, every shadow, every possible hiding place, as if she were mapping escape routes before even entering the hotel. It was the behavior of someone who had spent a long time being hunted. Across the street, Cole adjusted the reins of his bay horse, pretending not to have noticed the stranger's arrival, but his blue eyes couldn't look away from the feminine figure walking toward the hotel. Cole was everything Ethan wasn't. Gentle where the other was brutal, hopeful where the other was cynical, a dreamer where the other was pragmatic. At 29, he worked as a hired gun for Baron Marcus Thornfield, the richest and most corrupt man in 3 counties, but secretly dreamed of the day he would gather enough courage to abandon that life and build something of his own, something clean. Cole had noticed details that others missed. The exceptional quality of Isabella's dress, which cost more than most Redwood Creek residents earned in a year, the discreet but clearly expensive jewelry she wore, the way her hands, though delicate, showed small scars that suggested familiarity with manual work or even violence. There was a contradiction in her that deeply intrigued Cole. The friendship between Ethan and Cole had been born 15 years earlier, when they were just orphaned boys, fighting to survive on the dusty streets of Sacramento. They had shared stale bread, cold nights, and impossible dreams. They had saved each other's lives more times than they could count. Ethan had pulled Cole out of a fight with 3 grown men when he was only 14, taking a knife wound to the shoulder in the process. Cole had dragged Ethan out of a burning building 2 years later, burning his own hands to save his unconscious friend. But now, as Isabella climbed the steps of the Grandview Hotel, both felt that something fundamental was about to change between them, something that not even 15 years of loyalty could protect. It was as if a storm was forming on the horizon, invisible still, but charged with a destructive energy that both could feel in their bones. Isabella registered at the hotel under the name Isabella Montgomery, claiming to be the widow of a San Francisco merchant. She told the desk clerk, a nervous man named Herbert, that she intended to stay only a few weeks, enough time to resolve pending business related to her late husband's inheritance. But there was something in the way she avoided looking directly into people's eyes, something in the way her hands trembled imperceptibly as she signed the register, that suggested her story was much more complex than it appeared. Herbert, who had worked at the front desk for more than 10 years and had developed a sixth sense for problematic guests, noticed that Isabella paid for her stay with genuine gold coins, not the banknotes that most travelers used. He also noticed that she carried a small leather bag that never left her sight, a bag that seemed too heavy to contain only feminine personal items, But Herbert was a wise man who had learned that excessive curiosity could be dangerous in frontier towns. In the first week, Isabella kept to herself, going out only for morning walks and solitary meals at the hotel restaurant. But her walks followed strange patterns. She never took the same route twice, always checked if she was being followed, and had the habit of stopping in places that offered multiple escape routes. It was as if she were constantly prepared to run. During these walks, Isabella discreetly studied the town and its inhabitants. She memorized the location of every exit from town, identified which residents were potentially dangerous, and mentally mapped where she could find horses, weapons, or supplies if she needed to leave quickly. It was behavior that had become second nature after years of living as a fugitive. Ethan and Cole, each in their own way, began to orbit around her like planets attracted to a mysterious sun. Ethan watched her from the shadows, using all the tracking skills he had developed as a bounty hunter. He noticed that Isabella never slept with the curtains completely closed, that she always left a candle burning during the night, and that she had the habit of checking her door locks multiple times before going to bed. These were the behaviors of someone who had spent a long time fearing nighttime attacks. Cole, on the other hand, found excuses to be in the same places as her, offering help with packages, holding doors, being the gentleman his mother had taught him to be before she died of tuberculosis when he was 12. He noticed that Isabella spoke with a slight accent he couldn't completely identify, as if she had spent time in many different places. He also noticed that she knew things about the town that a stranger shouldn't know, as if she had studied Redwood Creek before arriving. The tension in town began to grow in subtle ways. Horses became restless when Isabella passed nearby, as if they sensed something humans couldn't detect. The town's dogs, normally friendly with strangers, kept their distance from her, growling softly when she approached. It was as if the animals perceived a predator disguised as prey. Martha Henley, the owner of the fabric store and the town's biggest gossip, began spreading theories about the mysterious widow. She swore she had seen Isabella talking to herself in her room, as if practicing different accents or personalities. Martha also claimed that Isabella never bought the same items twice, as if she were avoiding creating patterns that could be tracked. Reverend Thomas, a man normally charitable with all strangers, felt inexplicably uncomfortable in Isabella's presence. He had tried to visit her to offer spiritual comfort, as he did with all the bereaved, but something in the way she had looked at him had made his blood run cold. There was a coldness in her eyes that seemed incompatible with genuine grief. It was on a rainy Thursday that Isabella finally spoke to one of them. Cole was at the hardware store when she entered, looking for a small hammer to fix a picture frame in her room. The rain had soaked her dress, making it cling to her body in a way that revealed a more athletic silhouette than would be expected of a society lady. Cole also noticed that she moved with a grace that suggested training in dance, or perhaps something more martial. He offered to make the repair, and she accepted with a smile that made his heart race like a galloping horse. But while Cole worked, he noticed disturbing details in Isabella's room. There were multiple escape routes planned, ropes hidden under the bed, clothes organized for a quick departure, and a window that had been modified to open silently. It was the room of someone who expected to have to flee at any moment. While Cole worked, Isabella prepared tea, and they talked about simple things: the weather, the beauty of the mountains, the tranquility of the town. But Cole noticed that she skillfully deflected whenever he tried to learn more about her previous life. More disturbing still, he noticed that Isabella knew details about his own life that he had never shared with her, that he worked for Thornfield, that he had lost his parents young, that he dreamed of leaving his current life. It was as if she had investigated everyone in town before even arriving. During the conversation, Isabella let slip small details that didn't fit with her story as a respectable widow. She casually mentioned knowing the dangerous streets of San Francisco, demonstrated knowledge about weapons that a lady shouldn't have, and made comments about human nature that suggested intimate experience with life's darker side. Cole began to realize he was talking to someone much more complex and potentially dangerous than she appeared. Ethan learned about the encounter through Tommy, the boy who worked at the stable and saw everything that happened in town. Tommy had noticed something strange. During the entire time Cole was in Isabella's room, she kept a small knife hidden in her sleeve, as if prepared to defend herself if necessary. It was a detail that Cole, distracted by her beauty, had completely missed. The news hit Ethan like a punch to the stomach, but not just from jealousy. His hunter instincts were screaming that something was wrong, that Isabella represented a danger Cole couldn't see. Ethan had spent years learning to read people, to identify predators disguised as prey, and everything about Isabella screamed danger. But it was a type of danger he couldn't completely define. That same night he appeared at Isabella's door, hat in hand, with an excuse about having heard strange noises and wanting to check if she was safe. Isabella invited him in, but Ethan noticed she positioned herself strategically between him and the window, always keeping an escape route available. It was the behavior of someone accustomed to dangerous confrontations. They spent 2 hours talking about books, about travels, about the loneliness they both carried like a second skin. But during the conversation, Ethan subtly tested Isabella, mentioning places and people that only someone familiar with the criminal underworld would know. To his alarm, Isabella responded to several of these references with knowledge that a respectable widow should never have. More disturbing still, Isabella demonstrated knowledge about Ethan's own past, details about his work as a bounty hunter that weren't public knowledge. She knew about specific men he had hunted, about methods he used, about his reputation in circles that a respectable lady would never frequent. It was as if she had studied not just the town, but every important person in it. From that moment, a silent war began between the two friends, but it was a war fought under the shadow of a greater threat that neither could completely define. Cole brought wildflowers to Isabella every morning, leaving them at the hotel reception with small handwritten notes. But he began to notice that Isabella never kept the flowers for more than a day, as if she were afraid that gifts could be used to track her. Ethan appeared whenever she went for walks, offering to accompany and protect her from the dangers a lady alone might face in a frontier town. During these walks, he subtly tried to extract information about her past, but Isabella was too skilled to fall into his traps. She answered his questions with other questions, deflected conversations with charm, and always managed to make him talk more about himself than she revealed about herself. Isabella accepted the attentions of both with a grace that seemed genuine, but there were moments when Cole caught her looking out the window with an expression of deep melancholy, as if she were waiting for something terrible that she knew would inevitably come. Other times, Ethan saw her discreetly checking the streets as if looking for familiar faces or signs of danger. During these weeks, strange events began happening in Redwood Creek. Lone riders appeared in town, asked questions about recent strangers, and left without explanation. Telegrams arrived for people who didn't exist, and letters were delivered to addresses that didn't correspond to any real residents. It was as if the town had become a meeting point for people who preferred to remain invisible. Martha Henley reported seeing strange men watching the hotel during the night, men who disappeared into the shadows when she tried to look closer. The local sheriff, a practical man named Bill Crawford, began receiving reports of suspicious activity, but whenever he investigated, he found no concrete evidence of anything wrong. Isabella seemed aware of all this activity, but instead of appearing frightened, she seemed to be preparing. Cole noticed she had begun wearing clothes that allowed greater freedom of movement, that she had changed her sleep patterns to be awake during the most dangerous hours of the night, and that she had begun carrying a larger bag that clearly contained more than feminine personal items. Ethan, using his investigative skills, discovered that several of the people who had asked questions about Isabella were known to work for criminal organizations from San Francisco. They were dangerous men, assassins and hired guns who didn't come to small towns unless they were hunting someone very important or very dangerous. Their presence confirmed his suspicions that Isabella wasn't who she claimed to be. The weeks passed, and the tension between Ethan and Cole grew like a storm forming on the horizon. They still greeted each other when they met on the street, still drank together at the saloon on Fridays, but there was a new coldness between them, a distance that had never existed before. Both knew they were competing for something more than a woman's love. They were competing for answers to questions neither could completely formulate. The town residents began betting on which of the two would win the mysterious widow's heart, not knowing that both were already hopelessly in love and willing to do anything to win that battle. But there was an undercurrent of tension that went beyond romantic rivalry. The more observant people in town began to realize that something bigger was happening, something that could put everyone in danger. Dr. Harrison, who had treated enough gunshot wounds to recognize signs of violence, noticed that Isabella had small but revealing scars on her hands and arms, scars that suggested familiarity with knives and other cutting instruments. When he tried to ask about them during a routine consultation, Isabella deflected with a skill that suggested practice in hiding the truth. Cole was the first to declare his intentions, but his decision was precipitated by events beyond his control. Marcus Thornfield, his employer, had begun asking questions about Isabella, questions that suggested he knew more about her than he was willing to reveal. Thornfield had casually mentioned that certain people from San Francisco were interested in finding a woman who matched Isabella's description. On an October afternoon, when the leaves were beginning to turn golden and the air carried the scent of approaching winter, Cole appeared at Isabella's door with a bouquet of red roses and a proposal he had rehearsed for days. But before declaring his love, he warned her about the questions Thornfield was asking, about the danger she might be facing. Isabella listened to the warning in silence, her eyes filling with tears she tried to hide. Cole realized she wasn't surprised by the news, as if she already knew she would be found eventually. It was then that he made his proposal. He said he was ready to leave his job with Thornfield, that he had enough money saved to buy a small ranch in the valley, that he wanted to build a new and clean life beside her, away from any danger that was pursuing her. Isabella asked for time to think, but Cole could see in her eyes that she was struggling with something much bigger than a simple romantic decision. There was fear there, but also an iron determination that suggested she was prepared to face whatever came her way. Ethan learned of Cole's proposal before Isabella even gave her answer. Tommy, the stable boy, had heard everything through the hotel's thin wall and ran to tell the gunslinger. But along with news of the proposal, Tommy brought even more disturbing information. He had seen armed men discreetly positioning themselves around town, men who clearly weren't local residents. Ethan felt something break inside him, a cold and calculating rage he knew well, the same he felt before each duel. But this time, the rage wasn't directed just at a stranger who deserved to die, but at the man he considered his only true friend in the world. More than that, he realized Isabella was in immediate danger, and that his rivalry with Cole might be putting everyone at risk. That night, Ethan sought out Isabella, but not to declare his love. He found her sitting in the small garden behind the hotel, looking at the stars with an expression he couldn't decipher. When he sat beside her, he didn't speak about romantic feelings. Instead, he warned her about the armed men he had identified, about the danger she was facing, about his suspicion that she wasn't who she claimed to be. Isabella surprised him by not denying his suspicions. Instead, she asked if he would turn her over to the authorities if he knew the truth about who she really was. Ethan replied that it would depend on what she had done, but that his first priority was keeping her safe. It was then that Isabella began revealing fragments of her true story. She told him she had been forced to do terrible things to survive, that there were powerful people who wanted to see her dead, that she had come to Redwood Creek hoping to find peace, but knew it was only a matter of time before she was found. She didn't reveal specific details, but made it clear that her life had been defined by violence and the need to hide. Ethan listened without judgment, recognizing in Isabella a kindred soul who had been forced to navigate life's darker side. He spoke about his own past, about the men he had killed, about the loneliness that came with a life dedicated to violence. He said he understood that sometimes people were forced to make impossible choices, that there wasn't always a clearly right option. It was during this conversation that Isabella made a revelation that changed everything. She said she had hidden evidence that could destroy some of the most powerful people in California, evidence she had collected as life insurance. But she also said that using this evidence would mean exposing secrets that could put innocent people in danger. Ethan realized that Isabella wasn't just a fugitive. She was someone who possessed information valuable enough for powerful people to want her eliminated. This explained the presence of armed men, the questions being asked, the growing sense of danger hanging over the town. The following days were silent torture for both men, but now for reasons that went beyond romantic rivalry. Isabella hadn't given an answer to either of them, but both knew time was running out. The armed men were positioning themselves, the questions were becoming more direct, and the sense of imminent danger was growing by the hour. Cole brought increasingly elaborate gifts, but now also offered practical protection. A fast horse kept always saddled, planned escape routes, contacts in other cities who could help her disappear. Ethan, meanwhile, began discreetly eliminating some of the men who were watching the town, using his hunter skills to reduce the number of potential threats. Isabella was aware of both men's efforts to protect her, and this left her torn between gratitude and guilt. She knew her presence was putting not just Ethan and Cole in danger, but the entire town. The people pursuing her wouldn't hesitate to hurt innocents if it meant capturing her. It was on a November morning that everything began to irreversibly crumble. Isabella was having breakfast at the hotel restaurant when a tall, thin man dressed in black from head to toe entered and walked directly to her table. The man had scars on his face that told stories of violence, eyes that seemed to have seen things no human being should see, and a presence that made the air in the room heavy like before a storm. He sat down uninvited, placed a revolver on the table so only Isabella could see it, and began speaking in a low voice. Cole, who was at a nearby table pretending to read a newspaper, managed to hear fragments of the conversation that made his blood run cold. Something about time running out, about important people getting impatient, about consequences she knew very well. The man spoke with the calm of someone who had complete control of the situation, but there was a cruelty in his voice that suggested he enjoyed the fear he was causing. Isabella turned pale as paper, her hands trembling so much that she knocked over her coffee cup, the dark liquid spreading across the table like blood. The man in black smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and said something that made Isabella stand up abruptly. But when she tried to leave, he grabbed her wrist with enough force to leave marks, whispering something that made her stop completely. Cole tried to approach, but the man in black intercepted him with a look that promised violent death. He said in a low voice, but clear enough for Cole to hear, "This isn't your problem, boy. Keep pretending to read your newspaper, and maybe you'll live to see the sunset." The threat was made so naturally that Cole realized he was dealing with someone for whom killing was as common as breathing. Isabella whispered something to the man in black, something that made him smile even more widely. He released her wrist and made an elegant gesture toward the stairs leading to the rooms. Isabella climbed slowly, each step seeming to cost immense effort, while the man in black followed her at a distance that suggested absolute confidence that she wouldn't try to escape. Herbert, the desk clerk, had witnessed the entire scene from behind the counter, his hands trembling as he pretended to organize papers. He had seen dangerous men before, but there was something about Isabella's visitor that terrified him in a way he couldn't explain. It was as if death itself had entered his hotel dressed in black. Cole waited 5 minutes before discreetly climbing the stairs, his heart beating so hard he was sure everyone in the hotel could hear it. He positioned himself near Isabella's door, trying to listen to the conversation happening on the other side. What he heard confirmed his worst fears. The man was describing in sadistic detail what would happen to Isabella if she didn't cooperate, and the things he would do to anyone who tried to interfere. Ethan arrived at the hotel 20 minutes later, alerted by Tommy about the stranger's presence. The boy was visibly shaken, his words coming out in nervous bursts as he described the man in black and how everyone in the hotel seemed to have been paralyzed with fear in his presence. Tommy said even the horses in the stable had become restless, as if they could sense the presence of a predator. But the man in black had already left, leaving only the smell of expensive tobacco and a sense of danger that hung in the air like toxic smoke. Ethan went up to Isabella's room and knocked on the door, but she didn't answer. He could hear muffled sobs from the other side of the wood, but also something more disturbing, the sound of someone moving quickly, as if packing in a hurry. Ethan went down to investigate who the mysterious visitor was, using all the contacts he had developed during years as a bounty hunter. What he discovered left him deeply disturbed and confirmed his worst fears about Isabella. The man in black had registered at the rival hotel on the other side of town under the name Vincent Blackwood, claiming to be a lawyer from San Francisco. But Ethan knew that face, those characteristic scars. Vincent Blackwood was one of the most wanted assassins in California, a man who killed for money and pleasure, who worked for powerful people who preferred to solve their problems away from the courts. He was known for his refined cruelty, for torturing his victims before killing them, for leaving sadistic messages for those who dared to defy him. Blackwood's presence in Redwood Creek could only mean one thing. Isabella wasn't just a common fugitive. She was someone important enough for very powerful people to send one of the most expensive and efficient assassins on the West Coast to find her. This elevated the danger to a level that could destroy not just Isabella, but anyone who tried to protect her. Ethan spent the rest of the day investigating discreetly, discovering that Blackwood hadn't come alone. There were at least 6 armed men scattered throughout the town, all professionals, all strategically positioned to surround any escape attempt. They had turned Redwood Creek into a trap, and Isabella was the prey they hoped to capture. More disturbing still, Ethan discovered that some of Blackwood's men had been in town for days, watching, learning Isabella's movement patterns, identifying anyone who might try to help her. They knew about her friendship with Cole, about the attention Ethan gave her, about every person she had interacted with. It was a meticulously planned operation. That night, Ethan and Cole met at the saloon for the first time in weeks, but not because of their rivalry. The threat hanging over Isabella had temporarily set aside their differences. They drank whiskey in silence, each lost in their own dark thoughts, until Cole finally broke the silence and asked if Ethan knew who the man in black was. Ethan told him what he had discovered about Vincent Blackwood, and Cole felt the blood drain from his face. He had heard stories about Blackwood, stories that brave men told in whispers. Blackwood wasn't just an assassin, he was an artist of torture, a man who found pleasure in his victim's agony. If he had come for Isabella, it meant she was involved in something much bigger and more dangerous than any of them had imagined. Cole then revealed something he had kept secret. During his conversations with Isabella, she had demonstrated knowledge about things a respectable widow should never know. She knew about smuggling routes, about codes used by criminals, about torture methods that only people familiar with the underworld would know. At the time, Cole had tried to ignore these signs, but now they gained sinister meaning. They decided to confront Isabella together, demand that she tell them the truth about her past and about the danger she had brought to town. But when they arrived at the hotel, they discovered that Isabella had disappeared. Her room was empty, her clothes were gone, and the only thing left was a note on the bed, written in the elegant handwriting they both knew well. The note said, "Forgive me. You deserve a better life than I can offer. Don't look for me. Forget I existed. With love, Isabella." But there was something else on the note, a small dark stain in the lower corner that looked suspiciously like blood. More disturbing still, there were signs that the note had been written under duress. The handwriting, though recognizable, showed signs of tremor that weren't characteristic of Isabella's normal writing. Ethan examined the room with the eyes of an experienced investigator, looking for clues that might reveal what had really happened. He found clear signs of struggle, a chair knocked over and carefully repositioned, a broken vase hidden under the bed, finger marks on the window, as if someone had tried to open it with desperate force. There were also small drops of blood on the carpet, carefully cleaned but still visible to trained eyes. Cole discovered something even more disturbing: footprints of men's boots on the carpet, footprints that belonged to neither him nor Ethan. The footprints were from someone heavy, who moved confidently through the room. as if he knew the layout well. There were also signs that multiple people had been in the room, suggesting Isabella had been overpowered by several men. The truth was obvious and terrifying. Isabella hadn't left voluntarily. She had been kidnapped, probably by Vincent Blackwood and his men. The note was an elaborate fake, an attempt to make sure no one looked for her, to give the kidnappers enough time to take her wherever they intended to take her. But Ethan and Cole weren't men who gave up easily, especially when it came to protecting someone they loved. They spent the night investigating, talking to residents, bribing informants, following trails that seemed to lead nowhere. The entire town seemed to have been infected with fear. People who were normally talkative refused to speak. Merchants closed their shops early, and even the saloon's usual drunks drank in silence. Herbert, the desk clerk, finally revealed disturbing details about what he had witnessed. He told them that Blackwood had forced Isabella to write the note, dictating every word while pressing a knife against her throat. He said he had heard Isabella beg for more time, promising to cooperate if Blackwood didn't hurt the people in town. Blackwood's response had been cold laughter and the promise that he would kill anyone who tried to follow them. It was almost dawn when Tommy, the stable boy, came running with information that changed everything. He had discreetly followed Blackwood's men, risking his own life to discover where they had taken Isabella. He had seen Isabella being taken by 3 men in a wagon, taking the road that led to the mountains, toward the old abandoned fort that was 2 hours' ride from town. Tommy described how Isabella seemed to be injured, how she had looked back one last time before disappearing into the darkness, how her eyes seemed to be trying to memorize the town she was leaving behind. He also revealed something that made Ethan and Cole's blood run cold. Blackwood had left 2 men in town, hidden and armed, clearly waiting for someone to try to follow Isabella. Ethan and Cole saddled their horses and left immediately, armed to the teeth and prepared for war. But as they approached the fort, they began to realize they had fallen into a carefully laid trap. There were men hidden in the rocks, shooters strategically positioned, an ambush that had been planned with military precision. Vincent Blackwood hadn't taken Isabella away from town by chance. He wanted them to follow her. The abandoned fort had been built during the war against the Mexicans, but had been abandoned more than 20 years ago when the border moved south. Now its stone walls served as a hideout for bandits and assassins, a place where screams wouldn't be heard and bodies could disappear forever. It was the perfect location for the kind of work Blackwood did. Ethan and Cole left their horses hidden among the trees and approached on foot, using all the experience they had gained in years of dangerous living. They communicated through silent signals, each movement coordinated, each step calculated to avoid the sentries they knew were waiting for them. It was then that they heard Isabella's voice, screaming from somewhere inside the fort. But there was something strange about the scream, something that didn't sound like despair or fear, but like anger, a cold and controlled anger that neither of them had heard before. It was the voice of someone who was fighting, not someone who had surrendered to fate. They exchanged confused looks and continued approaching, trying to understand what was happening. What they saw when they finally managed to peek through a gap in the wall left them completely shocked. Isabella was tied to a chair in the center of the fort's courtyard, but she didn't look like a helpless victim. She was arguing with Vincent Blackwood in a low and threatening voice, and there was something in her posture, in the way she kept her head high even while tied up, that suggested she was far from being a helpless lady in danger. Vincent Blackwood was walking in circles around her, clearly frustrated. His usual confidence seemed shaken, as if Isabella wasn't reacting the way he expected. They managed to hear fragments of the conversation, Vincent talking about orders from above and about time running out, about important people who wanted results. Isabella responded with defiance, saying she had fulfilled her part of the agreement, that she deserved her freedom, that she owed nothing more to anyone. The dynamic between them was strange, almost as if they were adversaries who had known each other for a long time, who had danced this dance before. It wasn't the typical interaction between a kidnapper and his victim, but something much more complex and personal. Isabella spoke to Blackwood as if she knew his weak points, as if she knew exactly which buttons to push to irritate him. It was then that Vincent said something that made Ethan and Cole's blood run cold. "Did you really think you could hide forever, Isabella? That you could pretend to be a respectable widow and no one would discover who you really are? The Black Widow of San Francisco can't simply disappear and expect her crimes to be forgotten." The Black Widow of San Francisco. The name hit Ethan like lightning. He knew this legend. All lawmen knew it. She was an assassin who had terrorized California high society for more than 5 years. A woman who seduced rich and powerful men before killing them and stealing their fortunes. She had been responsible for the death of at least 12 men, all killed in ways that seemed like accidents or natural causes. The police had never managed to get enough evidence to arrest her, but everyone knew she existed, that she was out there, planning her next strike. Cole felt as if the ground had disappeared from under his feet. The woman he had fallen in love with, the woman who had awakened dreams of redemption and true love in him, was one of the most wanted criminals in California. Everything made sense now. Her knowledge of violence, her familiarity with the underworld, the way she always seemed prepared to flee. She wasn't a victim of circumstances. She was a predator. But Isabella wasn't finished surprising them. She looked directly at Vincent Blackwood and said something that completely changed the situation's dynamic. "You're right, Vincent. I am the Black Widow. I killed 12 men in 5 years. But there's something you don't know, something your employers didn't tell you. All those men deserved to die. They were all monsters who destroyed innocent lives, who bought judges and police, who raped and killed without consequences. I wasn't an assassin for money, Vincent. I was justice." The revelation hit Ethan like a second lightning bolt, this one even more powerful than the first. He began to understand why Isabella had said that sometimes violence was the only language evil men could understand, why she hadn't judged his violent past, why there was something in her eyes that suggested intimate knowledge of human darkness. Isabella wasn't just an assassin, she was a vigilante, a woman who had dedicated her life to punishing men the legal system couldn't touch. Isabella continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "Charles Whitmore, the first man I killed, had raped and murdered 3 orphanage girls. The authorities knew, but he had enough money to buy his freedom. Marcus Delacroix tortured workers in his factories, slowly killing them with inhuman conditions. Theodore Blackthorne trafficked children to rich men with perverted tastes. They all deserved to die, Vincent, and I did the work the law couldn't do." Vincent Blackwood laughed, a harsh and unpleasant sound that echoed through the fort's walls. He said he didn't care about Isabella's motivations, that he had been hired to bring her back to San Francisco, where she would face justice for her crimes. But Isabella had one last card up her sleeve, a revelation that would make Vincent rethink the entire situation. Isabella told him she had discovered something about the men who had originally hired her, something they desperately wanted to keep secret. She had been recruited by a group of powerful men who wanted to eliminate commercial and political rivals, but who didn't want to dirty their own hands. They had promised to protect her in exchange for her services, but when she discovered they were using her skills for purely greedy purposes, she decided to act on her own. "They turned me into a weapon," Isabella said, her voice loaded with bitterness. "They taught me to kill, gave me targets, promised me I was doing justice. But I discovered they were using me to eliminate innocent people, to consolidate their own power. That's when I decided that if I was going to be an assassin, it would be on my own terms, for my own targets." The last man Isabella had killed wasn't a target designated by her employers. It was the group's own leader, a man named Senator William Hartwell, whom she had discovered was involved in child trafficking and other heinous crimes. His death had been attributed to a heart attack during an elegant dinner, but Isabella possessed evidence proving he had been poisoned, evidence that also implicated her former employers in dozens of crimes. "I have letters, Vincent," Isabella said, her voice now cold as ice. "Letters detailing every crime, every conspiracy, every innocent life they destroyed. I have photographs, financial documents, testimonies from victims who survived. If something happens to me, this evidence will be delivered to journalists in 3 different cities. Your employers don't just want to silence me, They want to destroy any evidence that I exist." Vincent Blackwood stopped walking. He was beginning to understand that he had been sent on a mission much more complicated than he had imagined. Isabella wasn't just a fugitive assassin. She was a woman who possessed information capable of destroying some of the most powerful people in California. Bringing her back alive meant risking her talking, but killing her meant never recovering the evidence she had hidden. "Where is the evidence?" Vincent asked, his voice losing some of its previous confidence. Isabella smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "In places you'll never find, with people you'd never suspect, scattered in such a way that even if you torture and kill every person in Redwood Creek, you still won't get all the pieces." It was at this moment that Ethan made a decision that would change everything. He had heard enough to understand that Isabella, regardless of her past crimes, was fighting against people who were much worse than she was. He rose from his hidden position, his hands hovering over his weapons, and walked toward the fort's courtyard. Cole tried to stop him, whispering that it was suicide, that there were too many armed men, that they needed a better plan. But Ethan was no longer thinking strategically. He was thinking with his heart, with the part of him that had fallen in love with a woman he now discovered was much more complex and dangerous than he had ever imagined. "She may be an assassin," Ethan whispered to Cole, "but she's fighting monsters, and I'd rather be on her side than theirs." Ethan entered the courtyard with his hands raised, pretending surrender. Vincent Blackwood smiled, clearly satisfied to have captured not just Isabella, but also one of the most famous bounty hunters in the West. He ordered his men to surround Ethan, but didn't notice that Cole had strategically positioned himself on the walls above, with a rifle aimed at his head. "Ethan Carter," Vincent said, recognizing the newcomer, "the famous bounty hunter. You know there's a considerable reward for the head of the woman you're trying to protect." "I know," Ethan replied calmly, "but I also know that sometimes rewards are placed by the wrong people." Vincent laughed. "Morality from a gunslinger? How interesting. Do you know how many men she killed?" "I do," Ethan said, his eyes meeting Isabella's, "and I know why she killed them." What happened next was a demonstration of coordination that only 15 years of friendship and mutual trust could provide. Ethan pretended to stumble, rolling to the exact side Cole had predicted, while the rifle shot echoed through the fort. Vincent Blackwood fell dead before even understanding what had happened, a perfectly round hole in his forehead. The other men, caught by surprise, hesitated for a crucial second, enough time for Ethan to draw his weapons and begin the gunfight that would define everyone's fate. The battle was brutal and quick. Ethan and Cole fought like the demons they had learned to be on Sacramento streets, each movement calculated, each shot accurate. Isabella, even tied up, managed to knock over the chair and roll behind a pile of stones, protecting herself from the bullets flying in all directions. But she didn't remain passive. Using a knife hidden in her boot, she cut the ropes binding her and joined the fight, revealing combat skills that confirmed everything Ethan and Cole had suspected about her. In less than 5 minutes, all of Vincent Blackwood's men were dead, and silence returned to the abandoned fort. The smell of gunpowder and blood hung in the air, mixed with the dust raised by the battle. Ethan and Cole checked each body, ensuring there were no survivors who could cause future problems. Cole came down from the walls and ran to Isabella, who was leaning against a wall, breathing heavily. She had a cut on her arm and scratches on her face, but was alive and relatively unharmed. When Cole tried to help her, she gently pushed him away, standing up with dignity and adjusting her torn dress. Isabella looked at both men with an expression that mixed gratitude, sadness, and something that looked very much like farewell. "Now you know who I really am," she said, her voice loaded with emotion. "You understand why I can't stay in Redwood Creek, why I can't accept the love you both offered." Ethan interrupted her. "I don't care about your past. You killed men who deserved to die. That doesn't make you a monster. It makes you someone who had the courage to do what was necessary." Cole agreed. "You may have been an assassin, but you were an assassin with purpose. That counts for something." Isabella smiled sadly. "You're better men than I deserve, but there's something you still don't know, something that makes any future between us impossible. It was then that Isabella revealed her final secret, the most devastating of all. She told them she wasn't really a widow, that she had never been married. The man she claimed was her late husband was actually her younger brother, an innocent 16-year-old boy who had been killed by the same men who were now pursuing her. James was all I had left of family, Isabella said, tears streaming down her face. He knew nothing about my life as the Black Widow. I had managed to keep him away from all of this, sent him to a school in the East, given him a chance to have a normal life, but they found him. They killed him just to send me a message. Her brother's death had been the catalyst that led Isabella to kill Senator Hartwell and steal the evidence she now possessed. She had discovered that Hartwell had personally ordered James's death, not because of any threat the boy represented, but simply to demonstrate that no one was beyond his reach. But there was something even worse. Isabella revealed that she had been slowly poisoned over months by her former employers, a subtle way to get rid of her without raising suspicions. The poison was destroying her body from the inside out, and she knew she had at most a few weeks to live. "I didn't come to Redwood Creek to hide," she said, her voice breaking. "I came to die in peace, away from the violence and corruption that defined my adult life. I wanted to find a place where I could just be Isabella, not the Black Widow, not an assassin, not a fugitive, just a woman who had made terrible mistakes but who had tried to do good in the end." The revelation hit Ethan and Cole like a physical blow. They had fought each other for the love of a woman who was dying, had risked their lives to save her from a fate she already carried within herself. Isabella said she had tried to maintain emotional distance from both of them, but had failed, that she had fallen in love with both in different but equally deep ways. "Ethan," she said, looking at the gunslinger, "you represent the part of me that understands the necessity of violence, that accepts darkness as an inevitable part of life. You showed me it's possible to be violent and still have honor." She turned to Cole. "And you represent the part of me that still believes in redemption, that dreams of a world where justice can exist without bloodshed. You showed me there's still goodness in the world, even after everything I've seen." Isabella said that if she had more time, if she weren't dying, it would have been impossible to choose between them. But time was running out faster than anyone imagined. As she spoke, she began coughing blood, her face becoming pale as paper. The effort of the escape and confrontation had accelerated the poison's effects. Cole caught her in his arms when she began to faint, and Ethan ran to get water and anything that might help. But both knew there was nothing they could do. The poison had done its work, and Isabella was dying. Isabella spent her last conscious moments in Cole's arms, with Ethan holding her hand. She said she had found in Redwood Creek something she had never expected to find: true love, genuine friendship, the possibility of redemption. She said that even knowing she was going to die, the weeks she had spent in town had been the happiest of her adult life. "Don't blame yourselves for my death," she whispered. "Don't let this destroy the friendship you have. You're soul brothers, and I don't want to be the reason that's lost." She asked them to find the evidence she had hidden and use it to bring justice to the families of her victims and to expose the corruption network that extended to the highest levels of California government. She said there was a box buried behind Redwood Creek's church containing documents sufficient to destroy a dozen powerful men. Isabella died at sunset, with her head resting on Cole's chest and her hand intertwined with Ethan's. Her last words were an almost inaudible whisper. "Thank you for showing me there was still goodness in the world. Thank you for loving me, even knowing who I was." Isabella's funeral was the largest Redwood Creek had ever seen. The entire town attended, even without knowing the truth about who she really was. To them, she was simply the elegant lady who had brought a bit of sophistication and mystery to their simple lives. Ethan and Cole carried the coffin together, their rivalry buried along with the woman they had both loved. After the funeral, they found the box Isabella had mentioned. Inside were documents sufficient to destroy a dozen powerful men, evidence of crimes ranging from political corruption to murder and human trafficking. There were also personal letters from Isabella, explaining her motivations, asking forgiveness for her crimes, and expressing hope that her death could bring some good to the world. They turned everything over to federal authorities, ensuring that Isabella's death wouldn't be in vain, that her last mission as a vigilante would be completed. The resulting scandals shook California politics for years, leading to the arrest of dozens of powerful men and the exposure of a corruption network that extended throughout the state. Cole left his job with Marcus Thornfield and moved to Sacramento, where he used Isabella's evidence to become a private investigator, specializing in exposing corruption. He never married, dedicating his life to continuing the work she had begun, but in a legal way and within the system. He always carried a small photograph of Isabella, a reminder of the woman who had changed his life forever. Ethan continued as a bounty hunter, but completely changed his approach. He began choosing his targets more carefully, focusing on men who truly deserved to be hunted, criminals who hurt innocents and escaped justice through money and influence. He also never married, carrying Isabella's memory as a reminder that even in the deepest darkness, it was possible to find light. The two men maintained contact over the years, their friendship strengthened by shared tragedy. They met once a year, on the anniversary of Isabella's death, to visit her grave and remember the extraordinary woman who had changed their lives forever. They never talked about what could have been, about which of them she would have chosen if she had lived. That question remained unanswered, a mystery they carried until the end of their own lives. The story of Isabella Montgomery, the Black Widow who became a vigilante, spread throughout the West like a legend. Some people said she had been a cold and calculating assassin. Others claimed she had been a heroine who fought against injustice when no one else could do it. But for Ethan and Cole, she had simply been a complex and courageous woman who had found redemption in love, even knowing she wouldn't have time to enjoy it. Years later, when both were old men with gray hair and hands marked by time, they still wondered if they had made the right choice in saving her that day at the fort. Isabella would have died anyway, the poison in her system ensuring there would be no happy ending to her story. But they knew they had given her something precious in her last moments, the certainty that she was loved, that her life had meaning, that her search for redemption had been successful. The true wisdom Ethan and Cole learned from Isabella wasn't about love or rivalry, but about purpose. They understood that some people are born to live in the shadows, to do the dirty work that civilized society prefers to ignore. Isabella had been one of those people, a solitary warrior fighting against darkness with the only weapons she possessed. And in the end, she had found peace, not in victory, but in the certainty that she had fought on the right side. Redwood Creek was never the same after Isabella's passage. There was something different in the air, a sense that great events had happened there, that lives had been changed forever. The older residents sometimes told stories about the mysterious lady who had arrived on a September afternoon and left forever on a November night, leaving behind only memories and a well-tended grave in the town cemetery. Ethan and Cole aged knowing they had loved an extraordinary woman, a woman who had chosen justice over safety, redemption over self-preservation. They carried her memory like a treasure, a reminder that true love sometimes means being willing to let go, to accept that some stories don't have happy endings but are still worth living. And so the story of the Black Widow of San Francisco came to an end, not with revenge or violence, but with love and sacrifice. Isabella had found in death the peace she had sought in life, and had left behind two men who understood that true strength wasn't in winning, but in protecting what you love, even when it means accepting loss. Isabella's final lesson was that redemption doesn't come from escaping the past, but from using experiences, even the darkest ones, to create something better. She had transformed her ability for violence into a force for justice, and had transformed two rival men into allies united by a greater purpose. Her death wasn't the end of her story, but the beginning of a legacy that would continue through the lives she had touched. Ethan and Cole lived the rest of their lives knowing they had been blessed to know a woman like Isabella, a woman who had proven that even in the darkest places, the light of redemption could still shine. And when it finally came time for each of them to leave this world, they departed in peace, knowing that somewhere, somehow they would meet again with the woman who had taught them both the true meaning of love and sacrifice.